Tonight on First Tuesday.
If you're poor and you're black, you do stand a greater chance of being hanged than if you're any other category. That's the reality of the death penalty in South Africa today.
Waiting for the gallows on Pretoria's death row, we look at a prison dedicated to the business of dying.
On a simple human level, it is unspeakably devastating to be sitting across a desk from someone like I'm sitting across this desk from you, knowing that in 10 hours' time, the whole apparatus of the state has been set in motion to break their necks and strangle them to death.
Good evening and welcome to the first Tuesday of a new decade. Our film tonight is first and foremost about the horrors of capital punishment. But it's also about capital punishment in a country where all the judges are white and 97% of those hanged are black. Where to be part of a crowd, to shout insults, to throw stones at the scene of a murder is enough to send you to the gallows. Just some of the reasons why the condemned cells are full to capacity in South Africa's death factory.
This is South Africa's death row, Pretoria Central Prison. During the 1980s, 1,200 people were hanged here, a rate of 1 every 3 days. The highest execution rate in the advanced world.
A frightening array of electronic, fortress-like mechanisms ensure that the people are kept inside until they are ready to be done to death. No one who has been to death row in Pretoria can't have come away with the impression of its being a huge death factory created for the killing of people. It is a gruesome and in many ways grotesque place. And no lawyer who has been in it can fail to come away with a feeling of the ghoulishness of what happens inside there. This is heightened in a way by the fact that between the outer perimeter wall and the actual prison complex, the death row complex inside, there are very beautiful natural features. There are fountains and running streams. There are ducks and a little pond and a patch of grass. And the grotesque contrast between these natural features and the business of what goes on inside is very severe.
Even on death row, apartheid persists. Blacks and whites are separated right up to the gallows.
Between 1980 and 1988, South Africa executed 1,070 people. In 1987, it reached a high of 164 persons. That year was absolutely terrible. In December of that year, in the second week of December, 21 people were executed in 1 week. 7 on Tuesday, 7 on Wednesday, 7 on Thursday. And we understand that that is a kind of pattern. It has established itself before the prison gets shorthanded with people on Christmas leave and so on, that you sort of clear out.
Now, as people get worked through the system and as their petitions fail, whether for rights of appeal or for clemency, that what we are going to find now is that many, many people are going to be executed. We've got almost 300 people on death row. We have over 200 sentenced to death every year. And indeed, I think we can now almost have this damming up effect, can result in almost a dam wall breaking and a rush of executions taking place.
Today, there are 300 inmates awaiting execution. Among them, the Uppington 14. Uppington, 600 miles west of Pretoria in the Northwest Cape, is a prosperous farming town. It's also the scene of the biggest murder trial in South African history, a trial which resulted in 14 blacks being sent to death row. Uppington is an old-style apartheid community. On one side, conspicuous white prosperity. The only blacks who enter these white enclaves do so as servants. On the other side of town is Pabalelo, the black township. Translated, it means place of play. Not a single home has running water or electricity. 1 in 3 people are unemployed. Of those who do work, 93% earn below the poverty line. These are among the worst conditions in South Africa. Yet Pabalelo's blacks never protested until November 1985. Then, 3,000 gathered on this football pitch. They were in prayer when the police broke up the meeting with tear gas. As the crowd dispersed, a section went to the home of an unpopular local policeman. His house was stoned, and he was driven out into the street, where he shot and paralyzed an 11-year-old boy. The 200-strong mob cornered him by these green huts. His skull was fractured with 2 blows from his own rifle, struck by 1 man. Yet 26 blacks were charged with murder under South Africa's notorious doctrine of common purpose. Just to be associated with the crowd was enough to warrant the murder charges, regardless of who dealt the fatal blows.
One of the most passionate points of debate in South Africa about the application of the death penalty is this doctrine of common purpose. In essence, the doctrine says that if you are involved in a murder, even if you do not actually carry it out, you are guilty of murder and you are liable to the same consequences. In South Africa, you are liable equally to the death penalty.
And in May 1989, under the common purpose doctrine, the Uppington court sentenced 14 of the defendants to death.
There's very gentle sobbing throughout the proceedings, which were very short. The judge, in fact, allowed each accused, as he sentenced them to death, to address the court. And the accused did so with incredible humility. They spoke of their desire for the judge to live as long as they, in order that they could both walk together in the street in a free South Africa.
All 26 were convicted. 14 were to hang, 6 were jailed, and 6 youths, still guilty of murder, were freed to do community service.
There was this strange ambivalence within me because I walked out with 6 of my clients who could walk free back into that community, and round the back 14 were climbing into police vans on their way to be driven to Pretoria Central.
Those sentenced to hang included Gideon and Evelina de Bruin. Both are over 60. Both deny being at the killing. They leave behind 10 children.
I was phoned by my aunt himself. He phoned me, I'm sure, and told me that the people are found guilty. And I said, what? They are all found guilty. I said, that's impossible. All 26 of them. She said, yes. And I asked, what about my mother and father then? And she said, they are also in.
She feels utterly isolated and she's busy dying, essentially. Every time I visit her, that tells very distinctly.
Evelina's sister, Martha, had a stroke the day after the death sentences were passed.
Ek kom daarom weer oor die storie, maar ek is nog nie vrede, my hart is nog stikkend. Ek is bitter seer, want ek het iets groot verloor, my geliefde suster en my swaar wat ek bitter lief gehad het. Van almal is ek vir hulle die meeste lief uit my hart uit.
The day before the sentence, we were sitting in the sitting room. The lady asked me, but when I am going to see my mother and father, just the day before the sentence, and we didn't know what the sentence will be. And I said to her, very soon, and Mr. Basson, give them a death penalty. So there's that possibility she will never see them again. If at all he have to die, then he showed that he will be in heaven. She'll be next to God. Definitely, that's what he said. Because he's been sentenced for something he never did.
Two more of the Uppington defendants come from the Masiza family. Ronnie Masiza was jailed for 6 years. His elder brother, Wellington, awaits execution on death row. Again, both deny being involved in the killing. Both were convicted under the common purpose doctrine.
Impilo isleha kakhulu ngoba kaloku ngabantwana bebesebenzela indlu ngoku fanele ukuba nendlu isemva yonke loo nto uba kusekhona laa tyala ke-85 yaphinda ngoko leke la matyala akho mntu usebenza. Isigwebo esibagotyesa ndisibona sibuhlungu kakhulu ngoba noko bengekho kulaa nto yela yokubulala laa mntu kodwa ke ndeva kabuhlungu ngenxa yesigwebo esingaka bathi omnye agotyelwa ubintambo omnye agotya iminyaka emithandathu sibe buhlungu kakhulu kum. Ndichaza uba benzile bethe abantwana bam babanjwa kuthiwa babulela ipolisi baze bawuvalelwa anoko ke bavalelwa uyise wabo ebengumntu ogulayo ngenampilo kodwa ithe ke ngoku xa sebengoku bevalelwe okokugqibela uba kuthi kuthathwa iibheyile zabo uthuka ngelo xesha ke akaba saphinda avuke kukothuka into yabo.
Those found guilty of the murder also include 2 vicar's sons, the town treasurer, 2 more women, and 5 men brought in to make up the numbers on a police identity parade.
The last 5 accused were in fact not suspects. They were not part of the original group of suspects. We were told that they had been picked up off the streets prior to the identification parade being held, merely to be used as extras at that parade. They were subsequently pointed out by state witnesses as suspects and were charged and convicted of murder.
We can appeal against the sentence of everybody.
Every month, Andy Durbach travels 500 miles from her Cape Town law practice to update the relatives of the 14 on progress in the case. They're trying to appeal against both conviction and sentence. So far, the 14 have spent 7 months on death row.
Argumenteer. All right, we can appeal against the convictions as well.
But for 2 sets of relatives, there is bad news today. 2 of the Uppington 14 made confessions in police custody. For these, there is to be no appeal against conviction.
Argumenteer.
Since the trial, Uppington police have shot dead 3 young blacks. All were unarmed. As a result, the community turned the funeral of the last victim into a show of defiance. In 2 of the killings, no charges have been brought. In the 3rd, the policeman has been released on bail, the sum £25. The rifle symbolizes the violent death of the victim. The song asks, "What have we done?" In 1985, the year of the Pabalelo murder, 760 blacks were shot dead by the South African police. Next day, relatives of the condemned 14 set out for Pretoria's death row.
The fact that they were 1,000 kilometers away meant that they could possibly, if they're lucky, get there once a month. It's the distance, I think, which is something that's very difficult for them to deal with.
In the first 5 weeks of de Klerk's new presidency, 15 more men went to the gallows. In South Africa, the death penalty remains on the statute book for treason, rape, murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. The retention of the death penalty for such a variety of crimes can lead to some macabre decisions. Last May, Desmond Uthala from Soweto was sentenced to death on 2 counts, murder and armed robbery, but was granted a reprieve on the murder conviction.
Shortly before he was about to be hanged, he was told by one of the warders that his petition for clemency had been successful, and indeed it had, but only on the one ground, and on the other one it had been turned down. So here was a man who for a very short period believed that he was off death row, when in fact effectively his reprieve had been turned down, and he indeed was executed. And one can only speculate at the mental anguish and torment that he went through during that whole period. Absolutely awful.
The notice of execution is normally given 7 days before the execution is due to take place. So the prisoner will be told on a Friday that he's going to be hanged the following Friday morning. And if you actually think of the terror of that, I mean, none of the people they murdered were given notice that you're going to be murdered next Friday morning.
Tuesday, 7 p.m. The Boersman family arrive in Pretoria. They've just heard that their son, Mangena, will be executed in 36 hours. He's to be hanged in another common-purpose murder case. He has not killed anyone. The family is counselled by Sandy Labisi from the Pretoria Council of Churches. Mangena is one of 4 men due to hang at death row this week.
So it's not only your son or your family who's there, but the number of people are also there who are also waiting to be hanged.
as if
Supreme Court Judge John Didcot has heard 500 murder cases, but has never imposed the death penalty.
One is just going to approach the matter incrementally, gradually reduce the number of death sentences by a variety of forms of the kinds that are being mooted, and eventually perhaps people will realize that if the death penalty is being imposed in a truly tiny proportion of murders, that it becomes extraordinarily difficult to have any faith any longer in the deterrent argument, that one is therefore just performing a ceremony to what end in a very small proportion of cases. So I hope to see that ultimate abolition, which of course I would like to see brought about. Whether it'll come about in my professional life may be doubtful. To come down to the level of the criminal and to retaliate for his act of violence, and one may add to do so in a far more cold-blooded and premeditated way than he may well have acted, is something that seems to me to be the overwhelming argument.
People now see the system of execution as being a white man's justice, a white man's executioner, presiding over a white man's gallows.
If you're poor and you're black, you do stand a greater chance of being hanged than if you're any other category. That's the reality of the death penalty in South Africa today.
97% of death sentences in South Africa are passed on blacks. Murder trials are heard before a judge and 2 assessors. There is no jury, virtually no legal aid. Invariably, blacks are defended by the most inexperienced lawyers.
You've got people who come straight out of university, and the first cases that they get after having qualified as advocates, that they defend people on death row who have capital crimes. And there's absolutely no question about it. They have no backup from an attorney. They act all on their own. They're desperately inexperienced. And frankly, the advice that is given, the counsel and the legal representation, is pretty hopeless.
With no automatic right of appeal in the courts, no one knows how many people are wrongfully convicted and executed.
There's no right of appeal. The vast majority of people get convicted, sentenced, and are hanged without being heard by another court.
The point is made, not infrequently, that courts are only human and fallible, and they can be wrong and they can make mistakes, and when you've hanged someone, it's too late to remedy the mistake. This, of course, is unquestionably so.
Wednesday, 11 a.m. Less than 24 hours before his brother, Jacobus, is to be hanged, Petrus Freeman waits as lawyers try to secure a late reprieve.
Hello, this is Shaksi. How are you? We're bringing an urgent application for a stay sometime this afternoon. I'm not certain what time, because counsel is only going to consult with the prisoner at 1 o'clock. That's the only available time, you know. Hopefully, because if the consultation is between 1, let's say for an hour, between 1 and, the papers could be ready by 3:30. Freeman, just a minute. Jacobus Freeman. Yeah, Jacobus Freeman. Okay, I'll notify the Department of Justice as well.
Shuk Sepanyetso of the Lawyers for Human Rights organization has won 2 stays of execution this week. But options are now running out, both for Freeman and Boersman.
Yes, could I speak to Peter, please? Peter, you know, I've got bad news for you. The minister is not prepared to intervene. One of the reasons he mentions is that this guy has a string of previous convictions, and he was the ringleader in this case. And on those facts, he's totally not prepared to intervene. I've just received a fax directly from the Department of Justice informing me that the only way they can really think of anything they can do is if we bring an application to court based on new evidence. And in as far as we've discussed it the other time, you know, there's hardly any new evidence we can think of. These guys were notified on Friday. I only came to know about it on Monday, and the execution is due to take place this Thursday. Freeman's advocate, he's in Eppington, it's in the Cape. When we phoned him this morning, he hadn't even received notification that Freeman is going to be hanged. For Bushman, I don't have any hope. I can't think of any other method, save maybe external or political pressure that can be brought to bear on the government to save Bushman from the gallows.
And on a simple human level, it is unspeakably devastating to be sitting across a desk from someone like I'm sitting across this desk from you, knowing that in 10 hours' time, the whole apparatus of the state has been set in motion to break their necks and strangle them to death.
The lawyers are busy.
Wednesday, 7 p.m. There are now only 12 hours left before Bosman and Freeman are due to hang. The family is told the battle to save Mangena from the gallows is almost certainly lost.
So at the moment, namhla, good news namhla, sifumene ukuthi no, the international world and a number of organizations are trying to put pressure to the South African government ukuthi aba bantu baxolelwe babonke.
Wednesday, 9 p.m. The Bosman family have paid their last visit to Mangena. He will hang tomorrow morning alongside Jacobus Freeman at Pretoria Central Prison.
So we don't know the position with the izobanjani masivuka or ngokuhlwa namhlanje. So but sithembele kuThixo ukuthi nje mhlambe into zingahamba kahle mama ukuthi basinde. Yeah.
Bebukeka noko kakuhle kodwa ke yonke kakuhle lo mhlobo kuba ngumuntu uziqinisile esazi ba uzahlela into efana nomhlobo. Ukumthiwa kwethu noko ubukekile kodwa ke ukuziqinisa yabona. Xa sorry because unqena ukhathaza mama wakhe yabona. Ubona kodwa ukhathazekile ngoba utesi wakha wakhalazela ukuthi hey iyatshona namhlanje ilanga and iFelix yethu. Wathi yena ngumgqibela kwethu xa sithi no saphinde sombona ngomso kusasa nge-6:30 phinde sasuka sofika pha ngo-7 wathi kuqinisekile mhlawumbi uba lisuku logqibela eli ngokuba ndincokola nam ngoku nandigqibelisa.
What we understand happens is the singing that goes on through the night. Now that's a very African custom. In a sense, it's the singing that takes place at a vigil on the night before a funeral, which is what it basically is.
And the night before, it is customary in South African prisons or in South African Pretoria Central to serve the inmate a tasty last meal. And that's generally a whole deboned chicken that the person would have. Now, for a lot of people, that is going to be their last taste of food.
The prisoners were taken to a room where they thought that they were being measured for their coffins. They were measured, and one of them described how a finger was pressed on the side of his neck. What it, of course, is the weighing and measuring that is necessary for the executioner to be able to get the knot just right and the rope just right to execute a particular person of this height and that weight.
For 24 years, South Africa's chief executioner was Chris Barnard. He has personally hanged 1,500 prisoners.
We used to play darts, talk, read the paper. I used to buy the paper and sit there after we put the roast up and sit and read the paper while the doctor and the dyer and them stood talking and laughing and making jokes and all the rest of it. And I used to sit and read the paper. And when the time comes, I used to go and stand at the door and do the execution. But it didn't worry me.
Sometimes there's physical resistance. Often there isn't any physical resistance. Some inmates go to the gallows without any form of physical resistance. Some have been reports of tear gas being used because people have resisted.
There were nine blacks from Cape Town. They were causers, but they formed a gang in Cape Town, and they went and murdered, I don't know how many people they murdered in Cape Town. They started putting up a hell of a fight. There was a terrific fight before they were overpowered, before they were taken up and executed.
You know exactly when you will die. And unlike people who are ill or terminally ill, you will die generally amongst strangers. You will not know the people who you are dying with, unless you may know an inmate. But generally you won't know that. The hangman will be somebody you don't know. The warder will be a stranger. Again, that makes death that much more difficult.
Thursday, 6 a.m. The Boosman family set out for death row. Mangena and Jacobus Freeman will be taken to the scaffold in 1 hour's time.
14 past 6 o'clock on this Thursday morning, and what a beautiful morning it is. Later this morning, John Birch will have yet another packet of peanuts to give away, a whole kilogram of those wonderful Simba super salted peanuts, plus 500 rand. And yesterday, the man who won the 500 rand was no less than one Mr. Chip.
There's a door there, and here inside is an office where the dominee could pray for them, read out of the Bible, make out their will, and all those sort of things. But they are numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I stand right at the back when they come in there.
The whole idea of people standing together on the drop, and number one has the noose adjusted around his neck and has to wait for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 before the moment comes. We actually then asked one of the opposition members of Parliament to table a question in Parliament about how these things worked and did these people have their own chaplain, what happened. And the Minister of Justice or the Minister of Prisons, whichever, asked him please to withdraw the question because the answers would be too gruesome.
They have white caps on with a flap. The moment you put the rope around his neck, they put this flap over his face. You pull the lever once, and whether one goes and whether 7 goes is the same. When a normal person drops is from 13, 14, 15 minutes, then he's extinct, then he's dead. And sometimes you have to pull themselves up and drop them a second time before they're dead. If the person is hung, he normally breathes. And when he is hung, his breathing is stopped. But his stomach, the air inside his stomach and his lung builds up. And when you release that rope, then there's a hell of a blowout. And it smells terrible. That's why over there I have a big fan fast, and I have one over there to blow all this smell away. Then they are stripped naked, and then the doctor examines them. And the doctor certifies them dead. They are pulled up again, a rope is put around their body, and they pulled up again. I take the rope off, and they go down onto a stretcher, and from the stretcher into a coffin. The coffin is nailed up, and they are taken to the graveyard.
Funda iBhayibhile leyo wathetha kunye nathi. Nathi wathi masiphakame ke siyaphakama because ipolisi lathi masime so aba bangamakhala beme ngapha sime ngapha. Wathi masithethe ke sathi phezu komangena zihamba kakuhle nathi samlandela. Sakhupha lo magama. Kwathiwa masiphume ke.
Kodwa banikhombisile ke idumbu zabo. Ngisho umzimba wabo
Hayi.
azange nikhombe.
Kange basibone.
Nibone ntoni?
Nedi boxes.
Iboxes bamchaza lo ngubani. Lo ngulo wayewela khalati. Eyakhe yokuqala le khalati ilapha
So we mustn't cry for him. We must just cry for ourselves that he just left for us.
Words which were actually inspiring you, making you to be strong. So those were the words from Omangena, ne?
Yes.
Oh. Yeah. And then the amabhunu lawa ke wona wayenjani nje? I-attitude yabo nabanye abantu.
Amabhunu abole njena bengamabhunu afuna ukuhlekisa. Uyabona. Ebengekho ku-feeling yongathi sihlele into embi. Abevuya ungathi kufinja. Ngatsho actually. Kuba kungeneni kwethu kwaphaya besibemile besijongile okabantu abavuyayo uyabona. Beko ashamed for that. So ke nathi kwi-feeling yeke ngathi singabantu ngathi sizinhlekisa. Kodwa ke sesiyazi ba sihlelwe ile nto asinamsebenzi nayo. Qha uThixo yedwa waziyo uyosiphendula mhlawumbe ngenye imini.
Noko sawuzama zixole inhliziyo.
Okay.
Kuba ijoni lifele ejonini ba.
Okay.
Bengumsebenzi bafele isizwe. Akenzanga into ingenziwa. Fele isizwe sakubo.
In 1985, international appeals failed to stop the execution of Pauline Moloisi's son, Benjamin, for murder. She too was refused permission to see her son on the day of his execution.
I am now prepared to be arrested because that is my son. If they don't allow me to go to his last prayer. There was no vigil at home. We were quiet. It was a miserable night yesterday. Until even this morning, it was miserable. I didn't expect that this government will be so cruel. I thought they will have mercy or at least give me time and chance to do my own, traditional way for my son. But they wouldn't allow me to do it. I don't know what have I done. This is a cruel, really.
Then he said, Mommy? I said, yes. He says, Mommy, I love you. I said, I love you too, my son. And I said to him, you know, there's one thing that I want you to bear in mind. I am so grateful about you. And I honor you and I respect you until up to the last day when I drop dead, then it will be over. Don't think now because I'm going to part with you, I am going to forget you. I'll never forget you. Even anything has happened or anything you have done, you are still my son.
Each year, on the anniversary of his death, the family returned to Moloisi's grave. The Moloisi family has no actual proof that their son is in the grave. In South Africa, the family is not allowed to identify or view the body before burial.
If they don't want us to see their body, I think maybe they kill them cruel. It's what I think with my own little common sense, that maybe they don't kill them in a proper manner. They just do a rough and tumble job. No wonder they don't want people to see those bodies.
One of the primary myths that exist amongst both the inmates and family members is that in fact people don't die on death row. What in fact happens to them is that when they are executed or when they are supposedly hanged, let us say, they drop beneath the floorboards, and underneath those floorboards exists the government mint, and there they work to make money for the government. And the mountain that one sees behind Pretoria's central prison is in fact the earth that has been dug out by these prisoners. And it's obviously also dug out to make space for more and more prisoners.
And these myths are bound to arise because people are denying the fact that somebody whom they love has been killed. And they build up these hopeful legends that try and shield them from the reality of what has happened.
The reality is an earth mover digging mass graves. The bereaved are not told the time or place of the burial, which is always held in secrecy.
For all black people in case of death, it's very important for people to view the body. I mean, coffins are designed in this country with a flap so that the coffin can open over the head of the person and respects are paid to that person. In the case of an execution, the coffin is sealed, it's taken from the prison and buried in a grave, and the family's not involved in that process at all.
Not until a month after the hanging can a family apply in writing for a death certificate and a grave number.
My brother's grave is K2381. So every time when I come here, because my brother's grave is not numbered, I first try and look at other grave numbers and then go down. Like this grave is K2387. So this one is 2386.
Temba Sulu's brother, Sipho, was executed in 1986. Temba has been campaigning for 2 years to move the coffin for reburial in his home township, 500 miles away.
And this is my brother's grave. But Sipho's grave, they don't have numbers in them. When I came in here for the last time, I just put in just this tin and some stones just to sort of like see that, okay, this is my brother's grave. When he was hanged, they did not wanted us to see his body. And then, well, other people, I'm not sure whether they were trying to protect us or whatever. They said, no, maybe the government is trying to save you because when the person is hanged, he looks bad, the head becomes big and the eyes comes out, the tongue protrudes or whatever. But we didn't care. We knew that something happens when the person is hanged, but then we just wanted to be sure if it is Sipho. And we wanted to bury him privately. I mean, we wanted to bury him as families.
The authorities will now permit the exhumation of Sipho Zulu's body. But South African law has to maintain the fiction that the death by hanging had been from natural causes.
When we applied for exhumation, and they sent us that reply that people who died of natural causes can only exhume after 2 years. But we're very cross, we're very angry about it, because we know that Sipho did not die of natural causes, he was killed.
Mamelodi Cemetery is the last resting place for all victims of South Africa's death factory. An estimated 2,000 bodies in the last 20 years. The Bosman family know their son will be buried here, but it will be at least a month before they can discover where. But for now, Freeman's brother Petrus and the Boesman family must return to their respective townships, both more than 500 miles away. Sandy Labisi will soon be meeting the next set of families on their final visit to death row. 700 miles away, the relatives of the Uppington 14 can only hope that their case will arouse sufficient international condemnation to win a reprieve from death row.
We are playing for their freedom. Give them their freedom. Let the children of the soil free. And let the world judge their deeds.
Let them not tell. Let them not tell. Let them not tell. Let them not tell. No, free them all. Free them all. Compatriots. No, free them all. Free them all. Compatriots. They are innocent. Free them all. Compatriots. Oh, let them hang. The Uppington 40. Oh, let them hang. The Uppington 14.
To film those shots of Pretoria's central prison, our team risked a 5-year jail sentence. The authorities are obsessively secretive about what happens there, and they've become even more restrictive since First Tuesday's visit. Take the matter of information about forthcoming executions. Up to now, Shucks Sefanyetso, the black lawyer from the human rights group, was able to win stays of execution because he knew the execution date some days in advance. Now he's told it's Justice Department policy to withhold such information from him. So his work has effectively been blocked. He can't represent those about to die if he doesn't know who they are. And even with the information they want, lawyers can't do very much. Evelina de Bruin is the only woman on death row, and we heard in the film about her fears for the young children she was never allowed to say goodbye to. She's 63, she's crippled with arthritis, she's weak and ill and illiterate, but the judge in her case won't grant her bail because he says she'll flee the country. And Evelina de Bruin is condemned to death for throwing stones. There are now over 300 people on death row in Pretoria. Thankfully, this pre-Christmas period, as far as we know, didn't bring the usual rash of executions. But the death factory stays in business, and as long as it does, and in the way that it does, it questions the real commitment of President de Klerk or any other South African leader to fundamental civilizing reform. First Tuesday will be back in February. Until then, good night.